I'm going to talk today about comparing yourself to other people. Now, we've all heard quotes like comparison is the thief of joy, or compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. And there are all these sort of isms that are floating around, and sometimes it's hard to parse out what's actually a valuable message and maybe how we should look at ourselves relative to other people, and whether comparing is even useful or even makes sense, etc. I happen to think that comparing yourself to other people it sort of actually has an evolutionary purpose, maybe you could think of it that way. It is a useful fiction, in my view, right? It's my opinion. So that is to say that it has its purposes, right? But ultimately it doesn't logically check out, right? It doesn't actually make sense for you to take yourself and take another person, and in doing that process, you will be very irrational when you're doing comparisons. Just that's because how you are as a human being, right? You're gonna have biases, and that's going to cloud your judgment. It's gonna make it an unfair comparison in one direction or the other, and it just becomes a stupid practice, right? It ends up serving no good logical end. Immediately, you might have some objections here, right? You might be thinking, well, Chris, isn't the basis of improvement noticing that there is a delta between who I am now and who I could be, and perhaps I'm only going to know who I could be by looking at other people and going, yes, I want those qualities, I want that kind of life, that's who I want to be, this is who I am, there's a delta, now I can improve, right? You might think, isn't that the basis for improvement? To some degree, yes, of course, right? A lot of desires are mimetic. We look at other humans and see what they're doing and we go, yes, like I want that too, right? So in some sense, yes, right? It's not difficult to imagine a person who is in a crappy situation in their life, right? And their well-being and the quality of their life would genuinely improve if they just were honest with themselves, looked at themselves in the mirror, recognize that they could be a lot more, and maybe having to look at some other people and compare themselves and be like, wow, I'm a loser, for example, right? And that might be their first step towards becoming a better version of themselves. That's not difficult to imagine, right? That's what makes comparison, again, useful, right? It has its purpose. Now, evolutionarily, you can even think that as men, let's say, right, we're always competing with each other in a hierarchy, right, of competence, let's say. The dominance hierarchy, right, as like Jordan Peterson would say. So that hierarchy is important because evolutionarily, that's actually what is going to help us to propagate our genetics, right, is climbing up that hierarchy, because ultimately, sexual selection-wise, women will always pick from the top, right? They'll always look, some people would call this hypergamy, let's say, right? They'll look at the top of the male hierarchy and they'll pick from the top, right? So climbing that is what allows you to actually have a higher chance of propagating your genetics. So there is a lot in you that is millions of years old in your actual brain chemistry to reward you when you're climbing that hierarchy, because it needs to tell your body like, hey, look, this is the way that we're going to propagate our genetics, right? So we need to keep climbing, and it's going to reward you when it notices that you're climbing and when you feel like you're better than relative to other men, right? So that's why you can see like, okay, it's actually useful. It serves some kind of purpose, right? This comparison. If there wasn't that comparison, there is no way you'd be able to tell your place in the competence hierarchy. And so therefore, there would be no way for you to be able to tell whether you're on the right path towards hopefully having some offspring, right? Which has that's the biological function. You can't avoid that is still wired into you to some degree. And in that process, that's going to improve the quality of your life, right? That's going to improve your access to resources. That's going to improve, the food, let's say, that you have access to, the quality of the food, the quality of housing, right? The quality of your mate selection, right, is going to be dependent on these things. So we can see it gets quite complicated in terms of looking at how this reflex to compare ourselves to other people has formed, right? But you can easily see that it has its uses. So you might be thinking, okay, well, where's the problem with this, Chris? Well, I don't think actually that there is a problem yet, because comparison in the macro to other people, I think actually, again, makes sense and it's useful. The problem is we have a tendency to also compare in the micro, right? What I mean by that is we will compare ourselves to other individual people. We're not just going to look at broadly in society, like, am I doing all right? Right? Like, we're not really going to do that, especially if you're growth minded and ambitious. You're going to want to keep growing, and you're going to look at individual people as basis of comparison to you. You're not going to be like, where do I stand in terms of, broader society? You're like, no, fuck those people. Where do I stand compared to this guy? I want what he has. He has this money, he has this lifestyle, whatever. I want that, right? So we end up making not just macro comparisons, but micro ones. And that's where I think this entire enterprise starts to fall apart, logically. Because a comparison relies on the basis of the measurements actually being fair and just, right? And the problem is you can't make fair and just comparisons between two individuals, right? Because you have had completely different lives, you've had completely different trajectories, you're going to be different ages, you'll have different IQ, you have different, all of these things, right? And not only just different good stuff, right? But you also have different problems in life. And when you're comparing yourself to someone else, you are actually just going to look for deficiencies in yourself, especially again, if you're trying to improve, right? You're going to look at someone who's ahead of you and you're going to look at one or two qualities that they have that you desire. You're going to look at those qualities and you're going to cherry pick them from that person's life and say, well, I want that. But at the end of the day, you can't actually do that. If you want to trade something with a person, you need to trade the entire set of qualities that they have. You can't just cherry pick them and say, oh well, I want his money, and I want his beard, and then I want her family, and then I want his house, and I want his car. Like, you can't just cherry pick what you want from different people. You have to trade your entire life with them, right? All of the good things that are going on for them, and all of their bad things, all of their problems, all of their insecurities. You have to take all of that with you, right? So envy and comparison in this sort of micro sense, you can see, it begins to not make sense anymore, right? Because you will quickly, I think, realize that, okay, well, I don't actually know if I want anybody else's entire life rather than my own. So I do BJJ, right? So we have belts in BJJ. There's white, blue, purple, brown, black. Like, that's the order, that's the ranking, right? So black is the most advanced, and then if you're a white belt, you are the most beginner. So I was hearing a BJJ athlete talk about this the other day, and it made a lot of sense. It's kind of adjacent to what I'm talking about now, which is that the old way of looking at belt systems in BJJ is that, okay, higher belt should always beat the lower belt, right? That this kind of a primitive way of looking at this. Oh, well, a black belt will always, should be beating a purple belt, and a purple belt should be beating a white belt, because that is the ranking, right? This is how it is. It should make sense this way. But the reality is that what belt you are in BJJ, and this is what the athlete was saying, is more like your measurement of your potential in the sport, right? And not your potential relative to other people. Because you could be a purple belt, like on your BJJ journey, but you could beat black belts, right? I mean, so this happens a lot in competition these days in BJJ, where you'll have blue and purple belts who are beating black belts in competition, and everybody's all shocked, like, whoa, what? But it's more that it's because they're purple belts relative to their potential. Like, they still have potential to grow, but their level, let's say, of potential as a purple belt has surpassed this person's potential as a black belt. So it makes sense that way, but we do these comparisons, right? Like, oh, well, this person's further ahead than me based on this metric, their belt color or the money in their bank, right? We make these comparisons, but again, they're not fair and just or whatever. They don't actually make sense, because you still could have a lot more potential to go. So, you could have a 65-year-old black belt, right? And if you were just thinking about belts and you see this black belt who's 65 years old and has poor, joint condition, and he's slow and old and tired and all these things, and then he rolls with like a 250-pound, like 25-year-old monster purple belt, like, the purple belt's probably gonna smash him. Comparing with others also doesn't make sense, because it depends on what you value as well, right? So if you're making a comparison, you have search filters that you're looking for, right? So, and those search filters are your values, right? So for example, if you value freedom a lot in life, right? You might compare yourself to the average person. So let's say I'm 24 right now. I just moved into this apartment, right? I'm an entrepreneur, like all these things. If I value freedom, I will take myself compared to, let's say, the average person who's my age and think, well, I'm doing much better, right? That's a great comparison. I feel happy about that because I'm more free, let's say, than the average person my age. Now, if I value security and stability, those are my search filters that are like filtering out the, let's say, the stats of, I don't know, someone's life. And I'm comparing the stats of stability. I'm less stable, right? I would say quite a bit less stable than the average person my age who, maybe has a secure job. They know when their money is coming for the next, all these months ahead, and they're just very stable, right? If that's what I value, then of course that comparison, I'm going to feel differently about that now, right, than I did when I was comparing based on something like freedom, right? And so we can play these games endlessly. And the average person rigs this game against themselves, right? You pick the search filters that are going to make you feel like you're at some kind of deficit, right? Because as a growth-minded person, you're always trying to bridge that gap. You're always trying to go, how can I improve this, and how can I improve that stat, and then I can improve this stat too, and then you're constantly looking for the delta. You're constantly looking for ways in which you're insufficient, right? And so that becomes an endless problem again. So backing up, let's overview what we've covered so far, right? Comparing yourself to others, maybe in a more macro sense, has its uses, right? Because it can give you a little bit of a kickstart, a jump start of, okay, I'm not where I need to be, right? And I need to look at other people as some kinds of basis of comparison. Where am I in the broad picture of reality, and do I need to get my shit together, right? That's important, right? And that's useful, okay? And then we also covered that you can't just trade individual qualities or stats with other people. You have to do a full swap, right? So in, let's say, a video game, I used to play Destiny, right? Or Halo and all these games, right? So, you can compare in Destiny, this game, you can compare stats of weapons, right? So it's like, you can't just trade one stat for one stat. Oh, I want this gun's damage, and I want this other gun's reload speed, and I want the RPM of this other gun, and I want the magazine size of this other gun. You can't really do that. You will have to do a full swap of these weapons, right? So that's what we covered as well, which is that you have a tendency to cherry pick, right? And that's a problem, right? And that's why doing comparisons like that doesn't make sense. We also covered that it also depends on what you value, right? Which stat are you looking at, right? You're probably going to rig the game against yourself and look at stats that you're just, deficient in because you're a growth-minded person, right? And again, you're going to do this individual stat looking problem, which is based on what you value, which also changes over time. We can think about this maybe in 3 sort of stages, where at stage 1, you don't compare yourself to other people because you're afraid to do so, because it will expose you for all of the ways in which you are currently not fulfilling your potential, and you're currently inadequate relative to your own ability and potential, right? That's level 1 person who is, if I don't see it, it's not happening, right? Willful blindness. Level 2 person is, okay, I need to compare myself to other people because that's going to give me motivation, and that's going to make me get off my ass and do things, and I'm going to keep comparing and keep comparing, and then, okay, I've hit this level, now I need to compare to the next level, and then now I need to compare to the next one. So this is level 2 person, level 2 of consciousness, where they're now doing all these comparisons because they know that it will keep propelling them further. Because they're going to keep feeling inadequate, and then once they feel adequate again, they need to make sure that they do the next comparison so that they can feel inadequate again, so that motivates them to do the next thing, okay? That's level 2 consciousness. Level 3, perhaps, not like I fucking know everything, but in my opinion, level 3 consciousness could look something like, I understand the utility of comparison, but I still recognize that it doesn't make sense for me to compare myself to another person because we have had completely different lives. We have a different set of fears and of desires and of insecurities and of wants and needs, and our baseline stats have been entirely different our whole lives. It doesn't make sense. There just isn't a useful or fair comparison to make to another individual. And the only comparison that actually makes sense is comparing myself to myself, right? Like I am the only person with whom I share all of the same qualities, attributes, strengths, weaknesses, life path, life trajectory, life experiences. I'm the only person. So I'm the only reasonable basis of comparison. So I just need to keep comparing myself to myself. And that's a really good sustainable way for me to grow without running into, too many problems of inadequacy and well-being and all these things. So that's what I think it could potentially look like, right? It's just recognizing that comparison ultimately to other people doesn't end up making sense. In my community, the Winners Circle, there's a ton of guys who are actually in there improving themselves and comparing themselves to who they were yesterday every single day. Because this month we're actually doing a challenge inside of my community, so you can check that out. It's the top link in the description. See if you'd like to join. It's just a group of guys who are extremely motivated to fulfill their potential, right? And we're doing challenges and interesting things every month to see how we can push ourselves beyond our limits. So that's going on this month, and there's plenty of other things going on. I'm releasing a course, a speaking course in there really soon, which is going to be amazing. So you can check that out if you'd like. If not, it's fine. And I will see you in the next video. Peace.